Every morning began the same way outside the precinct. Coffee steaming in paper cups, radios murmuring softly, the quiet shuffle of boots on concrete as the shift changed. Officer Daniel Reyes barely noticed the rhythm anymore. What he did notice was his K-9 partner, Atlas, sitting perfectly still by the front steps, ears lifted, tail held low but alert. Atlas was trained for chaos, for crowds and sirens in sudden danger, but this moment was always gentle, anticipatory. Then the woman appeared. She walked slowly, a small knit scarf tucked under her chin, hands folded as if protecting something fragile inside her coat. Atlas rose before Daniel could give a command. No bark, no lunge, just a soft whine and a careful step forward. His gaze locked on her with a devotion that felt almost reverent. Daniel felt the familiar tug of confusion tighten his chest. The woman smiled, a tired smile, and paused at the gate like she always did. Atlas sat. Perfect posture. Waiting. Easy, buddy, Daniel murmured, embarrassed by the attention of other officers glancing over. Atlas didn't move. He never did. Not until the woman nodded, whispered something Daniel couldn't hear, and continued down the sidewalk. Only then would Atlas relax, as if a silent promise had been kept. Day after day the same ritual. Same time. Same woman. Same quiet intensity in Atlas's eyes. Daniel told himself it was nothing, routine, coincidence, a harmless habit. But this morning Atlas trembled. His breathing hitched. He leaned hard against Daniel's leg, refusing to sit back down. And for the first time the woman stopped walking. Before we continue, remember to like, share and subscribe for more heart-touching dog stories. And tell me, where are you watching from? Morning settled gently over the precinct. Not loudly, not all at once. It arrived in layers, pale light sliding across the concrete, the low murmur of radios waking up, the smell of coffee drifting from the open door like a promise. Officer Daniel Reyes stood near the front steps, one hand wrapped around a paper cup, the other resting loosely at his side. His shoulders were relaxed, his breathing slow. Beside him sat Atlas. The German Shepherd's posture was perfect. Back straight, chest lifted, ears angled forward, not sharp, not alarmed, just listening. Daniel barely glanced down at him. After 3 years together, Atlas's calm presence felt like part of the building itself. Solid, reliable, a quiet anchor at the start of every shift. Cars rolled past on the street. A distant siren faded into the city. Someone laughed near the lockers inside. Normal. Atlas's tail moved once, then stopped. Daniel noticed that. He shifted his weight, eyes following the line of Atlas's gaze toward the sidewalk beyond the gate. First there was nothing. Just the stretch of pavement, damp from last night's mist. A few fallen leaves pressed flat against the curb. Atlas didn't blink. Hey, Daniel murmured, barely more than breath. You good? The dog's ears flicked back for half a second, acknowledgement, then returned forward. His mouth stayed closed. No panting. No tension in the jaw. Just focus. Footsteps appeared at the far end of the block. Soft. Measured. Unhurried. Atlas rose before Daniel gave the command. Not quickly. Not stiffly. He stood with intention, paws placed carefully, body aligned, head lowering just slightly as if to meet something on equal ground. A quiet whine escaped his throat. It wasn't loud. It wasn't distressed. It was gentle. Daniel exhaled through his nose. Easy, buddy. The woman came into view. She wore the same long coat Daniel had seen all week, a muted gray that blended into the morning. A knitted scarf sat high under her chin, wrapped too tightly for the mild weather. Her hands were clasped together, fingers worrying at the fabric as she walked. She slowed when she reached the gate. Atlas stepped forward one pace, then another. Daniel tightened his grip on the leash, not because Atlas pulled, but because he didn't. The dog stopped exactly at the line where the sidewalk met the precinct boundary. Saturday. Perfectly. Waiting. The woman smiled. It wasn't a big smile. Just a small lift at the corners of her mouth. Tired. Grateful. Familiar. Morning, she said softly. Her voice carried the faint rasp of someone who didn't sleep enough. Morning, Daniel replied, nodding. He kept it polite. Professional. His eyes flicked briefly to Atlas, then back to her. Atlas didn't look at Daniel at all. His gaze stayed locked on the woman, warm, steady, deeply attentive. His tail rested still against the concrete. His ears tilted outward now, relaxed, as if he were listening to something beneath her words. She crouched slightly, not close enough to touch him, never crossing the invisible line. You're early today, she whispered, to Atlas, not Daniel. Atlas's head tilted. Just a fraction. Daniel felt that familiar pinch of unease in his chest. It had started 4 days ago. The first time he'd laughed it off. K9s were friendly sometimes. They noticed patterns. People. Smells. No big deal. The second time he'd paid attention. The third time he'd asked another officer if they recognized her. They didn't. Now it was the fourth morning. Same time. Same pause. Same quiet exchange that felt personal. The woman straightened, giving Atlas a small nod, like sealing a promise neither Daniel nor the world had heard. Take care, she said. Atlas let out a soft breath. Then another. Only when she turned and continued down the sidewalk did he relax, shoulders dropping, muscles easing, tail giving a slow single sweep. Daniel frowned. Okay, he muttered. That's new. Atlas glanced up at him, eyes calm. Trusting. As if to say it's fine. It always is. Daniel rubbed a hand over his jaw and let Atlas inside as the shift officially began. The day unfolded without incident. Paperwork. A routine patrol. A brief call about a noise complaint that turned out to be nothing. Atlas worked flawlessly. Alert when needed, relaxed when not. If Daniel hadn't known better, he would have said the dog had already completed his duty for the day. But when morning rolled around again, Atlas woke before the alarm. Daniel felt it, the shift in the room, the quiet energy beside the bed. He opened one eye to find Atlas sitting upright, ears forward, gaze fixed on the door. You've got to be kidding me, Daniel whispered. At the precinct, Atlas pulled ahead slightly. Not hard, just enough to suggest direction. He positioned himself by the steps before Daniel even stopped walking. And when the woman appeared, Atlas trembled. Not fear. Not excitement. Something deeper. His breathing changed. Shallow. Controlled. He leaned his weight gently against Daniel's leg, seeking contact while refusing to look away from her. Daniel's heart began to pound. Hey, he said softly, crouching beside him. What is it? The woman slowed. This time she didn't smile. Her steps faltered. Her hand pressed briefly against her coat, right over her chest. She stopped just short of the gate, eyes meeting Atlas's with sudden intensity. Atlas let out a low, aching sound, almost a plea. Daniel stood. All the quiet pieces clicked into place at once. This wasn't routine. This wasn't coincidence. This was Atlas sensing something no one else could see. And for the first time since they'd met, the woman didn't walk away. The woman stood still. Not frozen, just paused, as if her body had decided before her mind caught up. Atlas's ears angled outward, then forward again. His head lowered slightly, bringing his eyes level with hers. The leash between him and Daniel went slack. Atlas wasn't pulling. He wasn't straining. He was anchoring. Daniel felt it through the leather handle. A grounded weight, deliberate and calm. Not urgency. Not panic. Awareness. Ma'am, Daniel said gently. He kept his voice low, steady. Are you okay? She drew a breath that seemed to take effort. Her fingers tightened in the fabric of her coat, then slowly loosened. I'm fine, she said. Too quickly. Atlas's tail lifted just a little. Not wagging. Not stiff. Listening. Daniel crouched again, one hand resting lightly against Atlas's shoulder. He could feel the fine tremor there, subtle, controlled like a held breath. Atlas had done this before. Not many times. But enough. There were moments on search calls when he'd stop suddenly, ears forward, body angled just so, before any scent command, before any signal. Moments when Daniel learned to trust the pause. This felt like that. The woman swallowed. Her gaze dropped to Atlas, then back to Daniel. "He's very attentive," she said. Daniel almost smiled. Almost. "He's trained to notice changes," he replied. "Sometimes he notices them before we do." Atlas exhaled through his nose, a soft huff. His eyes never left her. She nodded slowly, as if that confirmed something she'd already known. "I won't take much of your time," she said. I pass through here every morning." "I've noticed," Daniel said before he could stop himself. She didn't look surprised. "Of course you have." There was no accusation in her tone, just quiet understanding. Atlas shifted closer to the gate. Sat again. Perfect posture. Waiting. Daniel straightened, glancing briefly over his shoulder. A couple of officers lingered near the doorway, pretending not to watch. Curious but respectful. "Do you need help getting somewhere?" Daniel asked. The woman hesitated. A long pause stretched between them. Cars passed. A bus sighed to a stop down the street. The city kept moving, unaware that something delicate was unfolding on the sidewalk. "No," she said softly. "Not today." Atlas tilted his head again. His ears dipped, then lifted. A soft sound left his throat, not a whine this time. Almost a hum. Daniel's chest tightened. "What is it, boy?" he whispered. Atlas's gaze flicked briefly to Daniel, then back to the woman. His body leaned forward a fraction, as if urging patience. The woman's eyes shone suddenly. Not with tears, not yet, but with something close. "He reminds me of someone," she said. Daniel waited. She knelt slowly, careful not to cross the boundary. Her knees touched the damp concrete. She rested one hand flat against the ground, palm open. Atlas did not move toward her, but his breathing slowed. Deep. Even. "He doesn't judge," she continued. "He just sees." Daniel nodded, his throat tight. "That's kind of his job." She smiled at that. A real smile this time. Brief but warm. "I should go," she said, rising carefully. "Thank you." She looked at Atlas one last time. "Tomorrow," she whispered. Atlas's tail swept once against the ground. When she walked away, Atlas remained seated longer than usual. His ears followed her steps until they faded. Only then did he stand and turn toward the building. Daniel stayed where he was. He didn't move for several seconds. "You know her," he said quietly. Atlas looked up at him, blinked once. Then he sat again, this time beside Daniel, and pressed his shoulder lightly against his leg. Daniel let out a slow breath. The rest of the day passed in fragments. A patrol through a residential block. A check-in at a community center. A quiet lunch eaten in the car. Windows cracked to let in the fall air. Atlas stayed close. Closer than usual. He walked half a step behind Daniel instead of ahead. His eyes scanned calmly, but every now and then they drifted, back toward the precinct. Toward the path the woman took. Daniel noticed. He always did. That night, Daniel found himself scrolling through old training notes. Behavioral cues. Stress indicators. Unprompted focus. None of it quite fit. Atlas wasn't anxious. He wasn't distracted. He was intentional. The next morning, Atlas was awake before dawn again. At the precinct, he took position by the gate without command. Daniel didn't correct him. They waited. The woman arrived later than usual. 5 minutes. Then 10. Atlas stood. His ears flattened briefly, then lifted. His weight shifted forward. He paced once, stopped, then sat again. Daniel checked his watch. "You're worried," he murmured. Atlas let out a quiet breath. His eyes stayed on the empty sidewalk. Daniel felt the tension settle in his shoulders. When the woman finally appeared, her steps were uneven. Slower. One hand pressed firmly against her side. Atlas rose immediately. A soft sound escaped him, low, controlled, filled with concern. The woman reached the gate and stopped, breath shallow. I didn't think I'd make it today, she admitted. Daniel was already stepping forward. Ma'am, he said carefully, I think you should sit down. She nodded, relief flickering across her face. Atlas sat beside her, not touching, just present, steady, watching. And in that moment, Daniel understood something simple and profound. Atlas wasn't guarding the precinct. He was guarding her. And whatever it was he sensed, it was getting closer. The bench by the gate was cold, metal worn smooth by years of waiting. The woman sat carefully, one hand braced against her side, the other resting in her lap. Her breathing evened out slowly, like she was counting each inhale. Atlas sat across from her. Not close, not distant, close enough to matter. Daniel stood between them in the street, posture casual but alert. He kept his voice light. Can I get you some water? She nodded. That would be nice. When Daniel returned with a paper cup, Atlas's ears lifted, then settled again as the woman took a sip. His tail remained still. His eyes tracked her face with quiet precision, noting every shift. Daniel noticed too. You're sure you're okay? He asked. She smiled faintly. I will be. That answer didn't satisfy Atlas. He leaned forward slightly, nose lowering toward her knees. He didn't touch. He just breathed in, slow and careful. Daniel felt a flicker of unease. Atlas, he said softly. The dog froze, not startled, just paused. His ears turned back briefly, acknowledging the correction. Daniel gave a small shake of his head. Sorry. The woman watched the exchange with gentle curiosity. He listens to you, she said. He does, Daniel replied. Most of the time. She smiled again. Then she winced, quick, involuntary. Atlas caught it. His posture changed. His chest lifted. His ears angled forward sharply now, not alarmed, focused. Daniel straightened. You sure you don't want me to call someone? He asked. She shook her head. No. Please. I just need a minute. Daniel hesitated. Every instinct he had as an officer told him to push, to insist. But there was something in her voice. Not fear. Resolve. Atlas settled back down slowly, though his gaze never softened. After a few minutes the woman stood. Thank you, she said. I'm sorry if I caused trouble. No trouble, Daniel replied. She glanced at Atlas. You take good care of him. Daniel smiled. He takes good care of me. She walked away. Atlas stayed seated. Too long. Daniel waited a beat, then another. Atlas, he said. No response. A second command, firmer. Atlas rose reluctantly, casting one last look down the sidewalk before turning inside. Inside the precinct the air was warmer. Louder. Someone had turned the radio up. A few officers leaned against the counter mid-conversation. That your girlfriend? One of them joked lightly. Daniel snorted. Hardly. She's here every day, another said. Kinda sweet, actually. Daniel shrugged. She just passes through. Atlas lay down near Daniel's desk, but he didn't sleep. His ears twitched at every sound. His eyes followed shadows on the wall. He rose twice without prompting, then lay back down. Daniel frowned. At lunch, he mentioned it to Sergeant Miller. Dogs pick favorites, Miller said, chewing thoughtfully. Routine. Smells. Probably reminds him of someone from training. Daniel nodded, though the explanation felt thin. That afternoon Atlas missed a cue. Just once. Daniel gave a hand signal during a routine sweep. Atlas hesitated, a fraction of a second, before responding perfectly. No one else noticed. Daniel did. That night, Daniel lay awake longer than usual. Atlas slept at the foot of the bed, curled tight. Every so often his ears twitched. His breathing changed. He shifted, alert even in sleep. You're fine, Daniel whispered into the dark. Atlas didn't move. The next morning rain fell lightly, the kind that darkened the pavement and softened the edges of the city. Atlas sat by the gate again. The woman didn't come. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Atlas stood. His tail lowered. His ears angled back, not fear. Concern. Daniel checked his watch. He scanned the street. Nothing. Okay, he said quietly. That's enough. He guided Atlas inside. The day moved on. But Atlas was restless. He paced during breaks. He stood at the door more than once. His focus drifted. By mid-afternoon, Daniel finally said it. This isn't normal. Miller raised an eyebrow. He's a dog. Daniel exhaled. He's my partner. That evening as they headed home, Atlas stopped. Just stopped. On the sidewalk. Mid-step. His body went rigid, not tense but braced. His nose lifted. His ears locked forward. Daniel felt the shift instantly. What is it? Atlas turned. Not toward the street. Toward the direction the woman always walked. Daniel followed his gaze. The sidewalk was empty. But Atlas didn't move. He sat. And waited. For someone who wasn't there. Daniel swallowed hard. He told himself it was nothing. Routine. Habit. Coincidence. He told himself he was reading too much into it. But as the rain soaked into his uniform and Atlas remained perfectly still, Daniel realized something unsettling. Whatever Atlas was sensing hadn't gone away. It had simply gone unnoticed. And that, Daniel feared, might be their biggest mistake. The rain stopped overnight. By morning the city felt scrubbed clean, sidewalks dark and shining, the air sharp with cold and wet leaves. A pale sun hovered low between buildings, uncertain but present. Atlas was awake before Daniel's alarm again. This time he stood. Not pacing. Not restless. Standing by the door. Daniel watched him from the bed, heart already tightening. You don't even know what day it is, he murmured. Atlas's ears flicked. He didn't turn around. At the precinct the routine resumed, or tried to. Boots echoed in the hallway. Lockers clanged shut. Someone cracked a joke about the coffee being stronger than usual. Daniel moved through it all on autopilot, eyes drifting again and again toward the front gate. Atlas positioned himself there without command. Saturday. Waited. Minutes passed. The woman didn't appear. Atlas's posture shifted. His back stiffened slightly. His tail lowered, then curled inward toward his legs. He leaned forward, not pulling, not lunging, just leaning as if proximity alone might change something. Daniel checked his watch. Okay, he whispered. Let's give it a few more. Atlas didn't respond. 5 more minutes. Then 10. A delivery truck rumbled past. A jogger slowed, glancing curiously at the dog sitting so still it looked carved from stone. Atlas stood. His breathing changed, quicker now, controlled but shallow. He turned once in a tight circle, then sat again. His ears flattened briefly before lifting back up. Daniel felt a ripple of unease move through him. Atlas, he said softly. The dog didn't look at him. Another officer stepped outside, coffee in hand. Your guy always this dramatic? Daniel forced a smile. He's attentive. The officer chuckled and went back inside. Atlas let out a low sound, not a bark. Not a whine. A warning meant for no one else. Daniel crouched beside him. You're telling me something, he whispered. I just don't know what yet. Atlas finally turned his head. Their eyes met. For a moment Daniel felt it. A strange sense of urgency wrapped in patience. Like standing on the edge of a memory that wasn't his. The woman didn't come at all that day. Or the next. By the third morning, Atlas arrived at the gate already tense. He didn't sit right away. He paced a small circle, nose dipping toward the ground, drawing in the air. His tail flicked once. Twice. Daniel watched closely. What are you picking up? He asked. Atlas paused. Saturday. Looked down the sidewalk. Waited. Daniel felt his chest tighten with something like guilt. He mentioned it again to Sergeant Miller. She probably changed her route, Miller said. Happens. Daniel nodded. But Atlas didn't accept that answer. On patrol later that afternoon, Atlas pulled, just slightly, whenever they passed the corner where the woman usually turned. He slowed near the crosswalk, ears lifting, nose testing the air. Daniel stopped correcting him. He let Atlas lead just a little. That night, Atlas didn't eat right away. He stood by the window, watching the street below as if expecting someone to emerge from the dark. Only after Daniel set a hand on his back did he move to the bowl. Even then he ate slowly. The fourth morning, Atlas refused to lie down. Not stubbornly, purposefully. Daniel stood beside him at the gate, feeling the weight of the quiet stretch between them. "This isn't a routine anymore," Daniel said under his breath. Atlas's ears angled sharply forward. A figure appeared at the far end of the block. Atlas froze. Daniel's heart jumped, then sank. It wasn't her. Atlas remained standing as the person passed. His shoulders sagged slightly when the sidewalk emptied again. Daniel felt the disappointment like a physical thing. Late that afternoon, the call came in. Not urgent. Not alarming. A welfare check. A woman reported dizzy near a bus stop a few blocks away. Daniel felt Atlas tense beside him the moment the address came through the radio. "Unit 12, you're closest." Daniel swallowed. "Copy." Atlas was already focused, ears forward, body angled toward the door. They arrived quickly. The bus stop sat near a small park. Leaves scattered across the concrete. A woman sat on the bench, hunched forward, elbows braced on her knees. Gray coat. Knit scarf. Atlas let out a sharp breath. He pulled harder than he ever had, just once. Daniel followed. The woman looked up as they approached. Relief flickered across her face, followed by embarrassment. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," she said weakly. Atlas sat in front of her immediately. Close now. Protective. His body angled slightly toward the street, as if shielding her from the world. Daniel knelt. "You didn't. Someone was worried about you." She nodded, eyes glassy. "I didn't think I'd make it all the way today." Atlas leaned in, nose near her hands, breathing steady and grounding. He didn't touch. But she reached out. Her fingers brushed the fur at his chest. Atlas went still. Daniel watched, heart pounding. "You know him," Daniel said quietly. She looked up at him, eyes wet. "I know what he represents," she whispered. An ambulance arrived moments later. As the paramedics helped her up, Atlas stood close, watching every movement. When they guided her toward the stretcher, he whined softly, distressed but controlled. "It's okay," she told him, reaching back. "You did your job." Atlas's ears flicked. The doors closed. As the ambulance pulled away, Atlas sat down hard on the pavement. Daniel stood beside him, stunned. The pattern was no longer subtle, no longer dismissible. Atlas hadn't been waiting out of habit. He had been monitoring, tracking, protecting. And now, as Daniel looked down at his partner, still staring after the disappearing ambulance, one truth settled heavily into his chest. Whatever Atlas had sensed from the beginning, it had finally surfaced, and they were already late. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and warm air. Too clean. Too quiet. Daniel stood just inside the automatic doors, Atlas seated perfectly at his side. The dog's posture was alert but contained, ears forward, tail low, eyes scanning every movement with steady patience. They had followed the ambulance without discussion. No one questioned it. Atlas didn't usually enter hospitals. The rules were clear. But this time, the nurse at the desk took one look at the dog, at the way he sat, calm and composed, and simply nodded. "He can stay," she said, "as long as he behaves." Atlas didn't move. Hours passed in fragments. A doctor speaking in calm, measured tones. Forms signed. A curtain drawn. Daniel sat in a hard plastic chair near the wall, hands folded loosely in his lap. Atlas lay at his feet, head resting on his paws, eyes never fully closing. Every so often, Atlas lifted his head, listened, waited. When the doctor finally approached, Daniel stood. "She's stable," the doctor said. "Exhausted. Dehydrated. There's something else we're running tests on, but she's not in immediate danger." Daniel exhaled slowly. "Can we see her?" The doctor hesitated, then nodded. Briefly. The room was dim. Late afternoon light filtered through half-drawn blinds, painting soft lines across the bed. The woman lay propped against pillows, color returning slowly to her face. The scarf was gone. Her hands rested on the blanket, fingers relaxed for the first time in days. Atlas entered first. Not rushing. Not hesitant. He stopped just inside the room and sat. The woman's eyes opened. She smiled. "There you are," she whispered. Atlas's tail moved once. Daniel felt something tighten behind his ribs. "You gave us a scare," he said gently. She sighed. "I didn't mean to." Atlas rose and stepped closer, slow, careful, until he stood beside the bed. He didn't touch. He just stood there, solid and warm. "He always knows," she murmured. Daniel hesitated, then asked quietly, "Knows what?" She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded toward the chair. "Sit," she said. "I think it's time." Daniel sat. Atlas stayed standing. "I come by the precinct every morning," she began, voice steady but thin, "because that's where it happened." Daniel's breath caught. "My son," she continued. "Evan. He was a patrol officer." Silence settled heavily in the room. Daniel felt Atlas shift, just slightly, his ears angling back as if absorbing the weight of her words. "2 years ago," she said. "Line of duty accident. A traffic stop that went wrong." Daniel swallowed. "He worked K9, she added softly. Atlas lifted his head. "Fully now." "He had a partner," she said. "A German shepherd named Atlas." Daniel's chest went tight. "Same name. Same breed." She smiled faintly. "Different dog. Same soul, I think." Atlas stepped closer to the bed. Daniel's voice came out rough. "He passed." She nodded. "Evan did. His dog survived. Retired shortly after. Went to live with another handler." Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. "I walk past the precinct because it's the closest I get to feeling like he's still going to walk out those doors," she said. "And you're Atlas." She reached out. Her fingers brushed the top of Atlas's head. This time Atlas leaned in. Just enough. "He smells like him," she whispered. "Not the same, but close enough to remember." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. "And the tests?" he asked gently. She exhaled. "Cancer. Early enough to treat, they say. But I've been tired. Weak. Some days are harder than others." Atlas let out a low, steady breath. "He's been watching me," she said, "making sure I didn't fall before I was ready." Daniel looked down at his partner. At the dog who had waited, who had paced, who had refused to let the pattern break. "He sensed your stress," Daniel said quietly. "Changes in your scent. Your gait. Your breathing." She smiled. "Evan used to say dogs don't wait for proof." Atlas rested his chin gently on the edge of the bed. The woman's hand settled fully into his fur now. "He reminds me I'm not alone," she whispered. "Even when I pretend I am." A nurse knocked softly at the door. "Time," she said kindly. The woman nodded. As Daniel stood, she looked at him. "Thank you," she said, "for listening to him." Daniel shook his head. "I almost didn't." Atlas straightened as they turned to leave. At the door, the woman spoke once more. "Officer." Daniel turned. "Whatever happens," she said, voice calm and certain, "he's doing more than protecting." Atlas paused. Daniel followed his gaze. The woman smiled at the dog, not with sadness this time but peace. "He's helping me say goodbye properly." In the hallway, Daniel knelt and pressed his forehead briefly against Atlas's. "You knew," he whispered. Atlas didn't respond. He didn't need to. His ears lifted. His breathing steadied. And for the first time since this had begun, Daniel understood the full truth. Atlas hadn't been guarding a routine. He had been honoring a bond. One that didn't end with death. One that didn't need words. And now that it had finally been seen, could begin to heal. The call came just before dawn. Daniel was already awake. Atlas stood at the foot of the bed, ears forward, body still. Not tense. Ready. Daniel reached for his phone as it buzzed on the nightstand. A quiet update from the hospital. A change overnight. Complications. Not unexpected but sooner than hoped. They're moving her, the nurse said softly. We thought you should know. Daniel sat up. Atlas watched his face. Something passed between them, no command, no training signal. Just understanding. I'll be there, Daniel said. The hospital was quieter this early. Lights dimmed. Hallways hushed. The world holding its breath. Atlas walked close at Daniel's side, nails clicking softly against the floor. Heads turned as they passed, but no one stopped them. Something about the dog's presence made space. In the room, the woman lay stiller than before. Machines hummed. A monitor traced gentle lines of light. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Atlas stopped at the doorway. Saturday. Waited. Daniel stepped closer to the bed. She's here, he murmured. You're okay. Her eyes opened slowly. She smiled when she saw Atlas. I was hoping, she whispered. Atlas rose and approached, careful and unhurried. He stood beside the bed, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him without effort. Her hand reached out. Atlas leaned in. Just enough. The doctor spoke quietly from the foot of the bed. Words like procedure, window, support. Daniel listened, nodded, but his attention kept drifting back to Atlas. The dog had gone still again. Not rigid. Centered. His ears angled slightly back, listening to her breathing. His nose hovered near her wrist, drawing in information Daniel couldn't read. Minutes passed. Then Atlas shifted. He lifted his head sharply. His breathing changed. Daniel noticed instantly. What is it? He whispered. Atlas stepped forward, placing his front paws closer to the bed. He didn't touch her, but his body blocked the space between her and the edge. Protective. The woman's breathing faltered. The monitor changed its tone. Everything moved at once. Nurses stepped in. The doctor gave quick instructions. Hands adjusted lines. Someone called for additional support. Atlas did not move. Daniel stood frozen for half a second, then knelt beside his partner. It's okay, he whispered. I've got you. Atlas's ears flicked back briefly, acknowledgement, then returned forward. He let out a low, steady sound. Not panic. Grounding. The woman's hand tightened in his fur. Stay, she whispered. Atlas stayed. The room filled with controlled urgency. Not chaos but speed. Calm voices layered over tension. The doctor's hand pressed firmly against the bed rail as he spoke. Daniel watched the woman's face. Watched Atlas. Watched the way the dog adjusted his stance every time her breathing shifted, every time the machines changed pitch. Like he was bracing the room itself. Slowly, the monitor steadied. The urgency softened. The doctor exhaled. That was close, he said quietly. But she's holding. Daniel realized he'd been holding his breath too. Atlas eased back a fraction. Not leaving her side, just releasing the pressure. His tail lowered. His posture softened. The woman's hand relaxed. She looked at Daniel, eyes glassy but clear. He knew, she said faintly. Daniel nodded. He couldn't trust his voice. Hours passed again. Light crept in through the blinds. Morning reclaimed the room. The worst of the crisis receded into memory. Atlas finally lay down beside the bed, chin resting near her knee. He slept lightly, ears twitching, breathing shallow and alert. When she woke again, her color was better. I think, she said slowly, he saved me some strength. Daniel smiled gently. He's good at that. Later that day, as she was moved to a quieter wing, Atlas walked beside the stretcher. No one stopped him. No one questioned it. By the time evening came, she was resting comfortably. Tired but stable. The danger had passed. Not entirely, but enough to breathe. Daniel stood by the door, leash in hand. Atlas hesitated. He looked back at the bed. The woman smiled. Go on, she said. I'll see you tomorrow. Atlas stepped forward, then turned back once more. He sat. Just for a moment. Then followed Daniel out. In the hallway, Daniel stopped and knelt, resting both hands on Atlas's shoulders. "You did good," he said softly. Atlas pressed his forehead briefly against Daniel's chest. That night, as they walked home under a sky washed clean with stars, Daniel felt something settle in him. This hadn't been a rescue in the way he was trained for. No sirens. No force. No command shouted into chaos. It had been quieter than that. A dog listening. Waiting. Refusing to look away. And because of that, a woman was still here. Still breathing. Still remembered. Atlas walked beside Daniel, steady and calm, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But Daniel knew better. Some rescues didn't look like heroics. Some looked like patience. Like presence. Like love that stayed, until it was safe to let go. The days slowed after that. Not abruptly, just gently like a river widening after rapids. Daniel noticed it first in Atlas's breathing. Deeper. More even. The restless edge that had followed him for weeks finally eased, replaced by something softer. Contentment. They visited the hospital every afternoon after Daniel's shift. No sirens. No urgency. Just quiet steps through familiar halls. Atlas walked calmly at Daniel's side, leash loose, posture relaxed. The staff no longer looked surprised to see him. Some smiled. A few nodded as if greeting a colleague. "He's part of the care plan now," one nurse joked quietly. Atlas didn't react. He never did to praise. The woman, her name was Margaret, grew stronger day by day. Color returned to her cheeks. Her voice steadied. The tremor in her hands faded. When Atlas entered the room, she always noticed. Even when her eyes were closed. "There you are," she would say softly. Atlas would pause at the doorway. Sit. Wait. Only when she reached out would he step closer. Slowly. Carefully. He rested his head against the side of the bed now, a solid, grounding weight. Margaret's hand moved easily through his fur, fingers finding the familiar texture like muscle memory. "This helps," she told Daniel one afternoon. "More than the medication some days." Daniel nodded. He believed her. He watched the way Atlas adjusted himself, shifting when her breathing changed, lifting his head when her pulse quickened, settling again when calm returned. He wasn't working. He was being. Daniel felt it working on him too. The guilt he hadn't realized he carried began to loosen. Guilt for doubting Atlas. For dismissing the signs. For assuming control meant command instead of trust. One evening, after Margaret fell asleep, Daniel sat quietly in the chair by the window. Atlas lay beside him, chin on Daniel's boot. "You taught me something," Daniel whispered. Atlas's ears flicked once. "I thought my job was to direct," Daniel continued. "To decide when things mattered." Atlas lifted his head and looked at him. Daniel smiled faintly. "Turns out, I just needed to listen better." Atlas rested his chin back down. Outside, the city glowed softly. Streetlights hummed. Cars passed in the distance. Life went on unremarkable, beautiful. Margaret began physical therapy the following week. Short walks down the hallway. Slow, measured steps. Atlas walked beside her. Not guiding. Not pulling. Matching her pace. When she tired, he stopped. When she steadied, he moved again. "You're very patient," she told him, smiling. Atlas's tail swayed once. Daniel watched from a distance, heart full in a way that surprised him. He noticed changes in himself too. He slept better. Laughed more easily. Found himself less rigid, more present. He let silences stretch instead of filling them. Atlas mirrored it. At home, the dog slept more deeply. Dreamed more quietly. The constant readiness softened into peaceful vigilance. One evening, as they walked past the precinct gates, not on duty, Atlas paused. Saturday. Looked at the door. Daniel stopped beside him. Margaret stood across the street, bundled in her coat, waiting patiently. Stronger now. Steadier. She waved. Atlas rose and walked forward, calm, confident. The routine remained. But it no longer carried tension. It carried meaning. Margaret met them at the gate. She rested a hand on Atlas's shoulder, eyes shining. I don't come here because it hurts anymore, she said quietly. I come because it heals. Daniel nodded. Atlas sat. Perfect posture. No waiting this time. Just presence. As Margaret walked away, Daniel felt something settle deep inside him. This wasn't closure. It was continuation. Healing didn't arrive all at once. It arrived in moments, shared steps, quiet rooms, steady breathing. On both sides of the leash, Atlas walked beside Daniel as they headed home, evening light stretching long shadows ahead of them. No urgency. No unfinished business. Just two partners moving forward, lighter than before. And somewhere behind them, unseen but felt, a bond at peace. Autumn leaned gently into winter. Not with cold but with clarity. The air sharpened. Leaves thinned from the trees. Morning light arrived later, softer, turning the city silver instead of gold. The routine at the precinct remained. But it felt different now. Atlas no longer waited with that tight, searching stillness. He sat by the gate because he chose to, not because something was wrong. His posture was relaxed, ears easy, tail resting loosely against the concrete. Daniel stood beside him, coffee warming his hands. They watched the sidewalk together. Some mornings Margaret came, other mornings she didn't. And Atlas was fine either way. When she did appear, she walked stronger now. Her scarf sat loosely around her neck. Her steps were steady, unhurried. She always paused. Atlas always sat. They shared a moment, quiet, complete, before she continued on. No tension. No fear. Just acknowledgement. One morning Margaret stopped longer than usual. I wanted you to know, she said to Daniel. The doctors say the treatment's working. Daniel smiled. I'm glad. Atlas's tail moved once. They asked me what changed, she continued. What helped me notice the signs early enough? She looked down at Atlas. I told them a dog reminded me I mattered. Atlas lifted his head slightly, eyes warm. Margaret laughed softly. That's not in any textbook, is it? Daniel shook his head. Some things aren't. She reached into her coat and pulled out a small photograph. Worn. Creased. My son, she said, handing it to Daniel. And his partner. Daniel looked. A younger officer stood smiling beside a German shepherd. Proud, focused, alive with purpose. Atlas leaned in, nose hovering near the photo. He breathed in slowly. Then he sat back, as if satisfied. Thank you, Margaret said, taking the photo back, for letting him be here. Daniel glanced down at Atlas. Thank him, he replied. Margaret smiled, and for the first time turned away without looking back. The days moved forward. Winter settled fully. Snow dusted the sidewalks. The city grew quieter under its weight. Atlas adapted easily. His coat thickened. His steps remained sure. One evening Daniel found a small plaque mounted near the gate. No announcement. No ceremony. Just a simple engraving. In honor of service seen and unseen. Daniel touched it briefly. Atlas sat beside him. Life didn't become perfect. There were still long shifts. Hard calls. Nights when the world felt heavier than it should. But something fundamental had changed. Daniel trusted more. Listened more. He understood now that protection wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was waiting. Watching. Refusing to let someone fade unnoticed. Atlas continued his work. Calm, steady, intuitive. Not just as a K9, but as a reminder. Of loyalty without condition. Of love without language. Of bonds that outlast duty, distance, even loss. One quiet morning as snow fell softly around them, Daniel knelt beside Atlas. You ready? He asked. Atlas looked up at him. Eyes clear. Breath steady. Always ready. They stood together as the city woke, two figures framed by light and shadow, moving forward in quiet partnership. And somewhere in the rhythm of passing days, in the space between footsteps and breath, an unbreakable bond endured, not because it was trained, but because it was felt. And felt things Daniel now knew never truly let go.